Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Frank Cespedes, and we're going to be talking about his book, Sales Management That Works: How to Sell in a World That Never Stops Changing. Frank, where can people find you?
Well, first, Tim, thank you very, very much for hosting me. I appreciate that. I appreciate you holding up the cover of the book. Flattery will get you everywhere with me. People can find me in, the usual places, LinkedIn, email. I do have a website, frankcespedes.com, although I confess I haven't been there probably in about 2 years. But all of those are places where I can be found.
Fantastic. I've read the book, love it. It's there's actually very few books about sales leadership and sales management. Lots of books about how to do salesy things, but not very many about sales leadership. And what you've done is obviously it's a new book, so we're kind of talking about the new world. But what you've also done is that, and we were talking about this before we came on, is that you use loads of research. So it's not, here is Frank's opinion, which quite often we get in books, but this is the research and the data. I'm going to unpack that, and then I'm going to talk about what that means today. So what inspired you to write the book today?
Well, basically two motivations, and you have hit on one. Of all the different functions in business, sales is by far the most context specific. Selling software is different than selling durables, is different than selling professional services, etc. It also depends where and to whom you're selling, right? Selling in North America is different than selling in Latin America or the Middle East or Asia. And yet, while it's very context specific, it is that area of business where, for some reason, people feel most comfortable making huge generalizations that are usually unsupported by any empirical data whatsoever, beyond what in academia we would call N equals 1. When I sold for Oracle, this is what worked for me, and I'm sure it'll work for you. Or, think about investors. When we invested in PayPal, and quite honestly, after 30 years, I've run a business, I've been doing, I think, decent research about this topic for decades. I did want to write a book that says this is what research does and does not tell you about this core business activity. And the second motivation is I think it is a particularly good time for a book like that. There is no doubt, you know this and what you do at DLA Ignite, there is no doubt that social media, digital online technologies, the data revolution that will continue throughout our lifetimes, no doubt it is affecting buying and selling. But most of what I read about what people say, I think deeply misunderstands the buying and managerial implications. And I think the pandemic, by the way, has raised the stakes for getting that right. So those were my motivations for this book.
Because you break it down, don't you, in terms of the people, the process, pricing, partners, and productivity, and focus in on those particular areas. Why did you pick those 5 areas?
Well, let's start with people. All right. People are obviously important in sales. We can go into the data, but it's not a digital eats physical world. It is an omni-channel buying world. I mean, think about it. Why have these direct-to-consumer companies, virtually all of them, including Amazon, I might add, why in the last few years have they all opened brick and mortar stores? They haven't done that because they woke up in the morning and said, wow, what a great business idea. Let's pay rent. Let's increase our fixed costs. They've done that because that's the nature of the omni-channel buying world. Salespeople are not going away. And here's a few bits of data that may put this into perspective. I'll use the United States because it's the best data about this. Turnover in sales tends to vary annually between 20 and 30%. All right. Now, what does that number mean? What it means is that once every 3 to 5 years, most companies need to hire, train, onboard the equivalent of their entire sales force. It's all about people and getting them up to productivity. So that's why I focus on the people parts. And then, like most management professors, I love alliteration, process, pricing.
We love a bit of alliteration. Yes,
that's right.
So why don't we pick up on the people and the training piece? Because I mean, as you say, it's so critical, isn't it, that we get the right people. I mean, I've been in so many situations where sometimes there was like you're not allowed to recruit, and then you're allowed to recruit, and you've got to go and get the people, and you've got to, and then the door's going to shut. So you end up getting people in, and if you've got a pulse, you can come in.
Yeah.
And then we're stuck with the wrong people. It's like, and so there's all kinds of lunatic ways that people have actually recruited. So what is it that we can be doing? What can we be doing better?
First of all, I think you're exactly right. I think that in the current labor market in many countries is actually a very, very good example, Tim, of what you're saying. Use the jargon. In the war for talent, let's hire a pulse. Bad idea. This is a very expensive decision, both in terms of direct costs. The direct costs are, what is it? We got to pay these people, the benefits, etc. And again, I'll direct people to the book, but people are usually surprised simply by what the direct costs are. But especially in sales, there are significant opportunity costs. Because sales is context specific, people have to learn how to sell your product, your service in your market at your price to your customers. And that time to productivity, what sales managers tend to call ramp up time, that's a very, very big opportunity cost. The other thing I would point out is that there have always been and continue to be inherent challenges in sales hiring that simply don't exist to the same extent in most other business functions. I mean, for example, if you want to hire a computer programmer or a finance person or an accounting person or an engineer, you can go to a school and find people that majored in those areas.
Yep.
But, most schools don't even offer a sales course, let alone a sales program.
Yep.
So the necessity to grow your own, to hire and train the right people is very big in sales. And to your point, many, many companies make a tough job needlessly tougher in their hiring and training. And we can talk about that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to. So what are the mistakes that are people making in the hiring process today?
Well, I mean, I think the first mistake, and what I'm about to say is as close to an established fact as anything that our listeners will hear from a management professor ever, because it is supported by 60 plus years of consistent research results. There is a dramatic over-reliance on unstructured interviews in sales hiring. And the correlation between the evaluations people get in their interviews and their actual subsequent on-the-job performance tends to vary from about 0.2 to 0.4. What that means is that even in the best of circumstances, it's less than the 0.5 50-50 rate of flipping a coin. Now, I have many, many colleagues who are very familiar with that research, and their advice to managers is therefore don't interview, right? I think only somebody who's never run a business can actually say that seriously. Of course you interview. People hire people. People have to work with people. Sales is about people, right? This social selling is about people. But you've got to supplement interviews with the right assessments for the right cause. And here again, many companies screw it up. They use assessments that were never developed for hiring purposes. Myers-Briggs, for example, to use in hiring, and they never train their hiring people in how to interpret the results. So all of those are mistakes. How do you get better? The most important thing is to clarify the important sales tasks in your business, not the sales tasks in some generic selling methodology, but the sales tasks in your sales model and in your business. And then managers must manage. They should use the deployment of the sales force in order to do two things. This may sound paradoxical, but you'll see examples in the book. On the one hand, focus on those tasks so that in turn, we don't need to hire, Michelangelo or Michael Jordan. We can hire average people because the tasks are focused. And in doing that, we also broaden the hiring pool. And then the other thing that I tend to point out to people is get people beyond sales involved in the hiring. For example, service and operations. Those are the people that have to deal with the outcomes of selling activities. And their perspective is usually a big wake-up call for many sales managers who do the hiring. So all of those are things you can do to improve hiring, and they're very, very actionable. This is not metaphysics. These are specific managerial activities that companies can and should do to deal with what in many companies is a bigger economic number than their biggest capital expenditure decisions annually. And I would remind our listeners that annually means every year.
I agree, and I think that breaking it down like that, I think, is so important. Ramp up time. I've worked for organizations where ramp up time can be 12 months.
Yeah,
that's a massive investment. But there again, if we were able to pull that down to 9 months, that was a massive saving.
Well, no, I'd point out two things about that. One is it's a good time to point out what you just did. We are in an era of rising interest rates, increased cost of capital. Tech firms listening, beware. Time to cash has always been important. Now it's vital. So if you can make that ramp up time 9 months instead of 12, that's a very, very big deal. And secondly, when you increase sales productivity, you're not only increasing the productivity of the firm, you're increasing the addressable market for the company, because segments that were uneconomic to reach now become economically feasible when you have better sales utilization. This is a very, very big deal strategically, not only in terms of, belly to belly or online selling.
So training is really important. How do we train salespeople?
Well, it's not
one of the things that we've debated is that there are internally is that there's very few places where you can get a qualification in sales. Well, there seems to be. And then is that actually appropriate for salespeople? I mean, I know lots of really good salespeople that have no qualifications. So what's the balance?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say a couple of things. One is I'm skeptical about qualifications, certificates. I would say really watch what you wish for. Let's get back to what I said at the beginning. Sales is very, very context specific. Yep. One thing we know about certifications and training, and for that matter, education, those generals tend to fight the last war. So I'm not convinced that that's what we need, because again, there is no such thing as effective selling if it's not tied to that company's particular business strategy and how they plan to grow and increase enterprise value. The second thing is that with training in particular, companies already spend a ton of money here. They spend on average 20% more per capita, per person on sales training than any other function. The issue is not do they spend, the issue is how they spend. And here the problems tend to be a dramatic over-reliance on classroom training, right? Talking about selling is not the same as selling. Yep. Selling is the ultimate performance art. It's about behaviors. It's about what people do. And the second thing I think is a failure, and this goes beyond sales, but because sales is so expensive, it's a great example of this. It's a failure for most training folks to really understand adult learning. And
Right.
that's different than classroom learning. I mean, salespeople are not studying for the final exam in my class. That's not the issue. They tend to pay attention to information when they need it and where they need it. And in sales, that usually means on your way to make a call or during the actual sales conversation itself. And by the way, this is an area where new technologies supported by folks who know something about adult learning can really, really help, because it helps the technologies really enable in cost-effective ways just-in-time learning. The second thing I'd point out about training, it's a great example in sales of what the training people call modeling behavior. And what they're getting at is that salespeople learn the most. You know, as a professor, I hate to say this, but they don't learn the most from professors. They don't learn the most from trainers and coaches. They learn the most by watching the best of their peers in action.
Right.
You know, the way you dealt with that price objection, that was clever. The way you framed the value to that customer, I'm going to do that. And again, these are areas where training can help disseminate that good practice. And it also gets back to your first point, Tim, which I think is exactly right. This is why hiring and training need to be linked, because the best of your salespeople are not just driving a lot of revenue. Because of modeling behavior, they're having an impact on others in the sales force. So it's really worth spending a lot of time and attention to these areas.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, I agree with you. It's sitting in a classroom is interesting, but it's actually getting out there and trying the things in the real world. And I know that most sales training nowadays will have some sort of thing that they'll interwoven in. There will be some sort of sale that you'll be working on or something like that. But it's really about going back and actually trying it in the real world. You know, what did Klaus von, what's his name, the German general said, which Mike Tyson said, changed to, nothing changes, you have a great strategy, you get punched in the mouth.
Right, that was Tyson.
And
Klaus
said,
everybody
everyone has a great strategy until first engagement with the enemy.
Yeah, and that is true. The only exception, of course, are my executive courses. Then you want to be in the class.
Of course. So, in the last couple of minutes, how can we make sure that sales tasks basically integrate into any organization's growth strategy?
Yeah, well, again, the first thing is to recognize the importance that they do need to integrate. When I say this, after I say it, I think the response of most people tends to be, duh, of course, that's obvious. But it's astounding how many well-educated, smart people forget this. Again, there's no such thing as effective selling if it's not tied to your business strategy and how your company is going to increase its enterprise value. May be good for the salesperson, may be good for their compensation.
Yep.
But as someone who sits on boards and works with investors, it is not good for those people. So what does that mean? A, understand the tasks inherent in your strategy. And again, this varies. It varies. Think about software. It varies dramatically whether your sales model is a so-called SaaS, software as a service subscription model, or an enterprise sales model. Very, very different tasks, right? SaaS is all about land and expand. Enterprise sales, very different. It's got that 6, 9, 12, 15-month selling cycle where false positives can kill you. Different issue. Selling capital goods versus selling professional services, where usually the salesperson is actually part of the product, is different. That's the responsibility of the company to understand its sales tasks, how it links to strategy, and then follow the good advice that we've been giving folks about hiring, about training, about performance management. And again, I don't have any simple, all right, 1, 2, 3 listicle to do that. That's why we pay managers the big bucks, as they say. That's their job. One of the problems that many companies have, and you'll see the documentation in the book. The reality, if you look at big companies around the world, Tim, is that fewer people than ever before have made it to the top, to the C-suite, without prolonged prior experience in customer-facing functions like marketing and sales. And the reason that's an issue is that whatever else the C-suite gets paid for, it gets paid to help formulate and implement a strategy that's relevant for the market as it works today, not yesterday. And that basic task is a bigger and bigger challenge for many executive groups.
Yeah, I've worked for organizations where you just would not have got on in the organization unless you've done some commercial role or other. Andrew says the point, one thing any training lacks is the experience and personal knowledge of the company's top sellers and how they approach each customer. And I think, capitulating what success looks like in that organization, I think is really important.
Yeah. No, I think Andrew's right. And, that doesn't happen naturally. It has to be managed because, every minute that top seller spends coaching someone else is a minute they're not spending prospecting or selling. So again, managers must manage, especially in sales. It's not like we just sit back and 100 flowers bloom. That's not exactly the way companies work.
And of course, I've seen a lot of sales management is basically managing a spreadsheet, which is, what we're going to sell, who to, and when we're going to sell it, and that's what they do.
I agree, but I think it's important to recognize why they do that. This is why change is especially difficult in sales and marketing. Sales and marketing people, as you know, Tim, they always talk hip, they talk cool, we welcome change, but they're among the most high inertia people in business. And the reason is systematic. So many other decisions in any business depend on sales forecasts and the ability of the sales forecast to actually make those numbers. And the metrics in sales reinforce that, right? You're going to get reviewed about the numbers every week, every month, every quarter. Notice what the incentive is there. The incentive is to avoid change and transition costs. Stick with the devil that spreadsheet, even as buying is changing. And that's how companies get disrupted. So I agree with what you said, but many of those people are simply responding to the metrics that determine their job. Always remember, I wrote a case study years ago, and the executive said to me, Frank, look, and he was a sales executive. He said, in my line of work, if you don't survive the short term, you don't have to worry about the long term. So that's the reality here.
Frank, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about your book, which is Sales Management That Works, How to Sell in a World That Stops Changing. Available on Amazon, of course. And remind people where they can find you.
Again, there's an email address, there's a LinkedIn page, there's the faculty page at Harvard Business School, and there is my neglected website.
Your neglected website that you've not been to for 2 years.
That's right. Tim, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. It's been a great chat. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the book as well. As I said, there's very few books about sales leadership and sales management, and especially up-to-date ones. And some of the ones I've read in the past are about, this is my opinion, so therefore it's true, whereas you've actually used data.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you so much for coming on today. And Andrew says thank you as well.